My stepsister fabricated a cruel lie that completely destroyed my reputation and turned my parents against me. They cut me off, gave her everything, and left me with nothing. Until a shocking truth emerged that left everyone, including them, absolutely speechless. When I was 18, something happened that I still struggled to comprehend. My stepsister Jade, who was only 2 years my senior, decided to falsely accuse me of a truly terrible act. It was the kind of damaging accusation that can shatter families and make people view you with contempt. It's still difficult for me to even articulate, but she claimed I had assaulted her. This wasn't a quiet rumor. It was a deliberate, calculated fabrication. The most agonizing part was that my parents, who had raised me and whom I believed knew me best, actually believed her. Let me provide some context. Jade was my father's stepdaughter from his second marriage, entering my life when I was about 10. Initially, things were amicable. We were just children navigating this unusual family arrangement. However, as we grew older, dynamics shifted. Jade was perpetually demanding, always seeking attention and assistance, particularly from my father and her mother. And they were far too eager to indulge her. I simply did my own thing and remained detached, honestly wanting no part in her drama. She and her mother frequently argued, usually over finances or education. Jade harbored grand aspirations of attending graduate school and achieving something impressive, but her mother wasn't exactly thrilled about perpetually funding her. They had a nasty dispute about it once, and I recall Jade coming to my mother weeping, expressing feelings of abandonment and lack of support. My mother comforted her, saying she understood, but I honestly thought it was excessive. Jade's mother wasn't cutting her off entirely. She simply desired her to begin supporting herself financially. I somewhat agreed, but naturally I kept that opinion to myself, at least until the day that ruined everything. Here's how that day unfolded. My parents were out, perhaps at an event or visiting friends. I don't recall precisely. I was home alone when Jade appeared at the door, looking absolutely enraged. She entered without even asking, dropped her bag, and collapsed onto the couch. I had no desire to hear about whatever argument she'd had with her mother this time, but she launched into it anyway. It was the familiar narrative. Her mother was unsupportive, no one believed in her, etc. I attempted to be polite and listen, but I simply couldn't hold my tongue this time. I told her, "Look, perhaps your mother is right. She's done a lot for you, and if you wish to continue your education, maybe it's time you began to support yourself somewhat." Honestly, I was as gentle as possible, but she did not take it well. She glared at me as if I had just insulted her entire existence. I could almost feel the anger radiating from her. She retorted, calling me a spoiled brat who didn't understand her hardships and how privileged I was, which is truly laughable because we grew up in the same house with the same parents. There was no privileged anything. We both simply had to make do. But in her mind, I suppose I was the adversary because I didn't immediately align with her. Then she hurled this absurd accusation at me. She said something like, "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? Well, you're just pathetic, and one day everyone's going to see it." I dismissed it at the time, thinking she was just angry and throwing a tantrum. I told her to calm down, that we could discuss it when she was less emotional, and then I left the room. I wasn't going to sit there and let her disparage me for having a different opinion. After she stormed out of the house, I thought that was the end of it. I figured she'd cool off, maybe remain angry for a few days, but eventually it would pass. That's just how she was, right? But the next morning, I was awakened by my mother, who appeared very distressed. She informed me that Jade and her mother were downstairs and needed to speak with me. I was confused, but assumed it involved Jade's argument with her mother, so I quickly put on a shirt and went downstairs, not at all prepared for what was coming. Jade was seated on the couch, head in her hands, her mother's arm around her. My parents stood nearby, looking absolutely stunned. The entire atmosphere in the room was tense, as if something major had transpired, and everyone was waiting for me. I was about to inquire what was happening when Jade began crying, claiming she couldn't believe what I'd done to her. Her mother was glaring at me, and my dad looked as if he might collapse. I tried to get them to slow down, to tell me what was going on, but Jade just kept repeating how I'd crossed a line and how traumatized she was. Then she blurted out that I had assaulted her. I couldn't even respond, I was so shocked. I just stood there, my mind racing, trying to process what she had just uttered. Before I could defend myself, her mother was upon me, shouting that I was a monster and that she couldn't believe I would do such a thing. My dad grabbed me by the shoulders and simply looked me in the eye. I could see the doubt, the anger, and it shattered something inside me. He told me to admit what I did and apologize. Apologize for something I didn't even do? I started explaining that Jade was fabricating it, that nothing had happened, but no one was listening to me. Then, amidst my parents and her mother panicking, I grew furious. I mean, truly enraged. I picked up a nearby vase, not even thinking, and smashed it against the wall, just to get everyone to stop yelling. It got their attention, but not in a good way. My dad immediately shoved me back, saying I was acting violently, and told me to go to my room. I ended up locked in my room for hours, pacing, fuming, trying to figure out what I was going to do. How could they just believe her without a second thought? I'd never done anything to make them doubt me before. I had no idea what Jade's motive was, but I was sure she was lying. I just didn't know why she'd go to this extreme. That day was the longest of my life. I stayed in that room until my dad came in and told me Jade and her mother had left. But I knew this wasn't over. The look in his eyes said it all. He thought I was guilty, that his son was some kind of monster. I tried to explain again, but he cut me off, saying he didn't want to hear any more lies. Just like that, my world began to crumble. The day after that awful accusation, things deteriorated faster than I thought possible. I imagined my parents might calm down, give me an opportunity to explain things clearly. I thought they'd at least sit down with me, truly discuss it. But that was just me being foolishly hopeful. By morning, any chance of reasoning with them was gone. I barely slept that night, just staring at my ceiling, replaying every tiny detail that had occurred. I kept thinking that maybe somehow this was all a bad dream, and that I'd wake up and things would be normal again. But no. Early the next morning, my dad entered my room with a serious, almost disgusted look on his face. He barely looked at me, just told me to come downstairs and that Jade and her mother were going to resolve things. As soon as I got downstairs, it was the same scene as before. Jade on the couch looking utterly broken, her mother beside her, and my parents looking completely crushed. I wanted to scream. Felt like I'd walked into some kind of intervention, but I was the one being attacked, as if I were this villain they all had to deal with. Before I even sat down, my dad launched into a lecture about how Jade was feeling unsafe, and how she couldn't be around me anymore. It was as if they had decided on a plan without even letting me speak. Then he dropped it. I was being sent away. I laughed, thinking there was no way he was serious. "You're actually kicking me out over a lie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. But he didn't answer, just looked at me with this cold expression, as if he didn't even know who I was anymore. My mom looked away, and I could see she was crying, but she didn't utter a word in my defense. I started pleading, saying I didn't do anything, that Jade was fabricating all of this, but it was like talking to a wall. Jade sat there, giving me these sad little glances, as if she were some kind of victim, and her mom was patting her back, whispering that it was going to be okay. My dad finally cut me off and told me that the only way they could avoid further embarrassment was if I disappeared for a while. They'd already agreed with Jade and her mother that if I left town, they wouldn't go to the police. That was the deal. Disappear. I asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" That's when they told me about my aunt. Now, my aunt wasn't exactly the warm, welcoming type. She was known in our family as the strict one, and nobody ever spent much time with her if they didn't have to. She lived a few hours away in this quiet little town, pretty much isolated from everyone. I hadn't seen her in years and barely knew her, but that was apparently where I'd be sent to keep Jade from seeing me and reliving her trauma. When I realized they were completely serious, I was furious. I told them I wasn't going to just let them shove me off to some random relative like I was trash. My dad looked at me very coldly and said, "You don't have a choice." Then he dropped the final bombshell on me. They were also giving Jade my college fund as part of the settlement. I couldn't even process that. My college fund. All the money my parents had saved up for my future, just handed over to her to keep her quiet. It was like they were paying her off with my life, with everything I'd worked toward. I just stood there dumbfounded, while they all talked around me as if I wasn't even present. At some point, I simply stopped speaking. I don't even know how long I stood there before I realized my dad was essentially waiting for me to pack up and leave. There was no discussion, no room for compromise. They wanted me gone, and that was that. My mom looked like she wanted to say something, but every time I looked at her, she just looked away, as if she couldn't bear to face me. With nothing left to say, I went upstairs and started packing my belongings. It felt like I was moving through water, my mind blank. I packed clothes, some books, a few items that were important to me. I didn't know how long I'd be gone, or if I'd even be allowed back, so I grabbed anything I thought I'd want if I was gone for good. I could hear my parents talking downstairs, their voices low, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. For a second, I thought maybe they'd come up, maybe they'd realize how crazy this all was and change their minds. But they didn't. Nobody came. After a few hours, they knocked on my door and told me it was time to go. My aunt had agreed to take me in, and they'd already called her to tell her I was on my way. They didn't even let me say goodbye to anyone. They confiscated my phone, saying that disappearing meant no contact with anyone from my life here. I had no idea how I was going to tell my friends, explaining why I just vanished. It didn't matter to them. They told me to pack whatever else I needed and be ready to go in half an hour. I'd never felt so trapped, so helpless in my life. I walked out of the house carrying my things, and I could feel my dad watching me from the doorway, as if he was making sure I was actually leaving. My mom was inside somewhere, not even willing to see me off. Jade and her mom had already left, and I remember feeling this strange sense of emptiness, like my whole life had just been erased in one day. The car ride to my aunt's was long and silent. My dad drove and he didn't say a word the entire time. I think I must have asked him once, maybe twice, if he truly believed Jade over me, but he just tightened his grip on the wheel and ignored me. I stared out the window, my mind a mess, and kept wondering what I was supposed to do now. How could I start over from scratch with no support, no plan? When we finally pulled up to my aunt's house, it was like being dropped off at a prison. Her place was small, a bit run down, with an old fence around it, and it felt so isolated. I hadn't seen her in years, and now I was supposed to live here in exile, all because of a lie. My dad didn't help me with my bags, didn't even walk me to the door. He just said, "We're doing this for your own good," and left. Standing there, watching him drive away without looking back, I felt this intense anger bubbling up inside me. My own family, the people who were supposed to have my back, had thrown me away like I was some criminal. And for what? To keep Jade happy? To save themselves from embarrassment? I wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something, but I didn't. I just stood there, gripping my bags, feeling completely alone. This was my life now, cut off from everyone I'd ever known. All because of a lie I couldn't defend myself against. I knocked on my aunt's door, and when she opened it, she didn't even smile, just looked me up and down and told me to come in. That's how I ended up here in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but a few bags and the betrayal of my family sitting like a weight in my chest. It was the worst feeling in the world, and I had no idea if it would ever get any better. Settling in with my aunt was difficult. I don't think she ever genuinely wanted me there. She didn't state it directly, but she didn't have to. The moment I stepped inside, she gave me a tight-lipped look and simply gestured down the hallway to a tiny room with barely enough space for a bed and a dresser. She muttered something about doing my parents a favor, and that I'd better behave myself. A nice welcome, right? My aunt wasn't unkind exactly, just distant. She adhered to her own strict routines and disliked any deviation. Meals at 6 p.m. sharp, no noise after 9 p.m., no guests ever. I wasn't permitted to touch the TV, the thermostat, or even use certain shelves in the fridge. She had an entire system, and heaven help me if I accidentally disrupted it. Honestly, it felt like being confined, and it wasn't even close to the worst part. The isolation was brutal. My aunt lived in this tiny town, practically in the middle of nowhere. There were hardly any shops, no social scene, just a few gas stations and some fast food establishments. I knew no one, and I wasn't exactly allowed to maintain contact with people from my old life. My parents had made that clear. They confiscated my phone, so I had no numbers, no emails, nothing. At first, I simply sulked, too enraged and hurt to do anything productive. I spent most of my days staring out the window, feeling sorry for myself, replaying everything in my head and trying to understand where it all went wrong. I was angry, a deep-seated rage building within me. I wanted to scream at my parents, Jade, and everyone else who'd abandoned me, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was trapped in this strange limbo, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. After a couple of weeks, though, I realized I had to leave the house, if only to preserve my sanity. My aunt made it quite evident she wasn't interested in supporting me beyond providing a roof. She'd leave job pamphlets lying around the house and make subtle comments about responsibility and pulling my weight. It was as if she was trying to make it so uncomfortable that I would simply get the hint and depart. So I decided to do the only thing I could: get a job and start saving to leave. I didn't have many options, especially without a college fund and no connections out here. I applied at a few places, mostly retail and food service, but nothing materialized until I secured a position as a warehouse worker. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. The work was grueling, hours long, and I'd return home covered in sweat and grime, barely able to lift my arms. But it gave me a reason to leave my aunt's house every day, and it put a little cash in my pocket, so I persisted. The best part was that I wasn't alone in my misery. I met a couple of coworkers who were around my age and dealing with their own issues. One guy, Derek, had accumulated some debt and was working double shifts to pay it off. Then there was James, who had just moved to town to escape a family situation that sounded almost as messed up as mine. We were all broke, overworked, and fed up, so we bonded pretty quickly. After a couple of months, we devised a plan. We'd pool our money, find an inexpensive apartment, and escape our dreadful living situations. I was completely on board. Anything was preferable to staying with my aunt. So we spent weeks scraping together every dollar we could, subsisting on ramen and dollar store snacks to save up. Finally, we discovered a rundown little apartment that was barely large enough for the three of us, but it was ours. Moving out felt like regaining my freedom, even if it was just a tiny bit. The place was a dump, but we didn't care. We purchased a second-hand couch that was probably older than all of us combined, an inexpensive table, and a couple of mismatched chairs. It wasn't much, but for the first time in ages, I felt like I could truly breathe again. Of course, things weren't exactly smooth sailing. Living on your own when you're broke is a struggle. We all worked long shifts, rotating between night and day jobs, and most of the time we'd barely see each other. But the moments when we were all home at the same time, slumped on the couch sharing a cheap pizza or complaining about our terrible jobs, made it worthwhile. We'd vent about our families, our bosses, and everything else that was making our lives difficult. It was like our own little therapy group. After a few more months, I started realizing I could actually build a life here. I mean, it was nothing like the life I planned for myself, but it was something. I received a promotion to a supervisor position at the warehouse, which meant a little more money, though not a lot. But with that extra income, I started saving for things I'd been missing, like a decent phone. Once I had one again, I considered reaching out to people from my old life, but I kept hesitating. Part of me wanted to reconnect, to tell everyone the truth, but another part was still too angry and too hurt to even begin those conversations. Instead, I focused on my new life. I enrolled in a few night classes at the local community college, just dipping my toe back into the whole education thing. It wasn't my dream school or the degree I'd planned for, but it was something. Plus, it gave me a reason to keep pushing forward, to keep working and saving and trying to make a life that was actually mine, not something I was forced into by my family's mess. Life was by no means easy, but I found little bits of happiness here and there. Derek and James became more like brothers than roommates, and we supported each other whenever one of us was struggling. If one of us had a rough day, the other two would bring home snacks or inexpensive beers. Well, not for me since I'm off that. We'd sit around talking about the future, trying to imagine a life that wasn't just getting by day to day. It was like we all needed each other to keep going, to remember there was something better waiting out there. I'd catch myself sometimes still angry, still thinking about Jade and my family, wondering how they could have just cast me aside like that. But I was finally learning how to push those thoughts aside, at least for a little while. I had my own life now, my own small circle of people who actually cared about me and didn't treat me like a criminal. For the first time since all this started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd make it through. Things had finally begun to feel manageable. Life wasn't perfect, but I had my own routine, a couple of reliable friends, and I was even making some progress in my job and classes. I wasn't exactly happy, but I was surviving, and that was a hell of a lot more than I thought I'd be doing a year ago. Then, one random Tuesday evening, just as I was getting back from work, my phone vibrated with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but something told me to check. It was from my dad. I hadn't heard a single word from my family since they'd left me at my aunt's house. I tried to shut them out of my mind, telling myself that I didn't need them, that I was better off without them. But seeing that email hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there staring at the screen, wondering if I should even open it. Part of me wanted to delete it instantly, pretend they didn't exist, but curiosity prevailed and I clicked on it. The message was surprisingly brief. My dad said he wanted to reconnect, and that there had been some new developments. He mentioned that Jade had finally come clean about what happened, just like that, as if it were a minor detail, as if she hadn't turned my whole life upside down. My brain was scrambling to make sense of it. Jade had admitted she lied. As I continued reading, the story unfolded. Apparently, her boyfriend, someone I didn't know or care about, had recorded her discussing the entire thing. She'd been talking to one of her friends, or maybe him, I don't know, but the point was she admitted to fabricating everything. She said she did it because she wanted to teach me a lesson, and that I deserved it after I'd put her in her place that day. The whole situation had spiraled out of control faster than she thought, and by the time she realized how far it had gone, she couldn't retract her claims. The worst part was my dad's tone in the email, almost excusing it. He said she was sorry, and that she was dealing with her own issues, and didn't realize the impact. I was stunned. She didn't realize the impact? Really? She took my entire life, trashed it, and they were acting like it was just some childish mistake. And my parents, the people who were supposed to know me better than anyone, had believed her without a single doubt. My dad concluded the email by saying he wanted to catch up, and that he hoped I would understand and move forward. Understand and move forward? As if he hadn't abandoned me the second things got tough? As if they hadn't stripped me of everything and forced me into exile? I was shaking with anger by the time I finished reading. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just sat there letting the reality of it all sink in. My friends Derek and James came home and noticed something was off. They asked if I was okay, but I brushed it off at first. I was too agitated, too angry, and I needed to process everything before I could even explain. That night I barely slept, the entire situation replaying in my mind over and over. All the times I pleaded with my parents, all the times they looked at me like I was a monster. It all came rushing back, this time with a new layer of betrayal. The next morning I told Derek and James everything. I started with the accusation, the abandonment, all the nonsense with my aunt, the warehouse job, and finally the email from my dad. They listened without interrupting, their faces turning from shock to anger as I explained what Jade had done and how my family had treated me. When I finished, Derek shook his head, looking like he wanted to hit something. So she just admitted it. And now they're acting like you should just forget it ever happened? Yeah, I replied, trying not to let my voice tremble. Just like that, like it was no big deal. James looked at me seriously. You should tell everyone. People need to know the truth. You've been hiding, man. You've let them control your life, even after they cut you off. I knew he was right. I'd been living in the shadows, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid to even reach out to old friends because of what my family might say. I'd been letting them dictate my life, even from a distance. But the thought of facing everyone, explaining what happened, it was terrifying. Still, as I sat there with Derek and James, a plan started forming. Later that week, I drafted a response to my dad's email. I kept it brief, just enough to let him know that I was done being their scapegoat. I told him I wasn't interested in moving forward unless it meant telling the truth to everyone. I needed my family to acknowledge what they'd done to me. I hit send and felt this strange mix of relief and anger, like I'd finally broken free but was still too upset to fully enjoy it. A few days later I received another email, this time from my mom. She was pleading with me, saying that family matters should stay within the family, and that I didn't need to go public. She begged me to think of Jade in her fragile state. It was ridiculous. They were still prioritizing her feelings above everything else, even after knowing the truth. I showed the email to Derek and James, and they practically urged me to go through with telling everyone. I needed to clear my name, to reclaim the life that Jade had stolen. That night, I logged onto social media for the first time in years. I'd avoided it, afraid of what people might think, afraid of all the lies they probably believed. But this time I wasn't hiding. I posted a long message explaining everything from start to finish. I revealed the truth about Jade's accusations, the fallout with my parents, being sent to live with my aunt, and all the struggles I'd faced since then. I didn't hold back. I wanted people to understand what I'd been through, the betrayal, the isolation. I needed them to know that I wasn't the monster my family had depicted me as. Once I hit post, I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding. For a moment I regretted it, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But then the responses started pouring in. Messages from old friends, distant relatives, even people I barely knew, all reaching out with shock and support. People were furious on my behalf, horrified at what Jade had done and how my family had treated me. It was overwhelming, but it felt like a weight was finally lifting off my shoulders. In the days that followed, the support continued. People were finally hearing my side, finally seeing the truth, and for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't hiding anymore. The days after revealing the truth were a blend of turmoil and liberation. My phone was inundated with notifications from old friends, family members, and even some acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. People were shocked, enraged, supportive, bewildered. It was a whirlwind, but it felt good, like people were finally understanding my perspective. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel as though I was drowning in a fabrication. Some of the messages were from family members who had sensed something was amiss, but hadn't fully pieced it together until they read my post. A few apologized, expressing regret for not reaching out sooner, for believing whatever narrative my parents had fed them. Some relatives even mentioned they'd been informed I'd moved away to clear my head, after some personal problems. The cover-up had been far more extensive than I'd realized, and my anger only intensified, knowing how much they'd lied simply to silence me and make themselves appear virtuous. Then there was the other side of it. My parents and Jade's mother were furious. I received emails from them, claiming I'd betrayed the family and ruined Jade's life. They accused me of dredging up old issues simply to harm everyone, and even asserted I was being cruel for doing it, while Jade was struggling. To be honest, reading their messages didn't even affect me anymore. It was the same worn arguments, them prioritizing Jade's feelings above everything else. They were so blind to the damage she'd inflicted that they couldn't see how preposterous they sounded, defending her when she had literally lied to devastate my life. I decided to block them all. I was finished. I'd given them every opportunity to come clean, to admit they'd been wrong, and instead they doubled down. I finally had control over my life, without them constantly interfering or making me feel as though I was somehow to blame for everything. After everything came to light, Jade's life spiraled rapidly. The support she had from people vanished once the truth spread. Everyone in our hometown knew she'd lied about something that's serious just to ruin my life and get her way. It didn't take long for word to reach her friends, teachers, old classmates. Everyone turned their backs on her. People started treating her as if she were radioactive, and honestly, I cannot say she didn't deserve it. Jade's mother was absolutely horrified. She had supported her daughter's story from the beginning, believing every word, and now the entire town was looking at her as if she'd raised some kind of monster. Eventually, she couldn't endure the shame or the consequences. People were explicitly telling her they wanted nothing to do with her as long as Jade was involved. Her mother attempted to smooth things over with apologies here and there, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. People were disgusted. The more everyone discovered, the worse it became. Finally, Jade's mother reached her breaking point and disowned her. I think it was a combination of shame and resentment. She probably felt manipulated too, her own daughter dragging her into this mess, making her appear complicit in something so awful. It's not easy to recover from that. Jade was left with no one in her corner. I heard that her mother even forced her out of the house. She was essentially alone, grappling with the repercussions of her own actions, and no one was willing to help her. With everyone in town shunning her and her own mother severing ties, Jade had no choice but to leave. She tried to remain at first, hoping things would subside, but people wouldn't let it go. Everywhere she went, she'd receive stares, whispers, people talking behind her back. She attempted to apologize to some individuals, but they simply turned her away. It became clear that she couldn't stay, not if she wanted any chance at a life that didn't involve constant judgment and isolation. Eventually, Jade packed up and left town. I'm not sure where she went, and to be honest, I don't really care. She had her opportunity, and she chose to ruin my life instead. Now she's the one dealing with the consequences of her lies, and from what I hear, she's completely on her own. With all of that finally behind me, I started focusing on the life I'd built here. Derek and James were there through the entire ordeal, keeping me grounded and reminding me that I wasn't alone. After years of feeling like I didn't have anyone, it was strange but comforting to realize I had people in my corner. We'd been through so much together in that cramped little apartment, and now that things were settling down, I felt closer to them than ever. Around that time, I started communicating with some friends from my old life who'd reached out after my post. A couple of them had moved to a nearby city and invited me to visit for a weekend. It was odd at first, like stepping back into a life I'd left behind, but it also felt good. They were genuinely interested in what I'd been doing, asking about my job, my classes, and the friends I'd made. There were no pitying glances, no awkwardness. They just seemed happy to have me back. That weekend made me realize just how much I'd missed having a normal social life. People who knew me from before everything went wrong. It was like a piece of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost was finally settling back into place. The best part was that I could finally be open about everything. No more secrets, no more hiding. My friends got to hear the real story, not the one my family had twisted and spread. This morning I woke up and made coffee, checking my calendar for the day's meetings. I had lunch scheduled with Kelly, a client presentation in the afternoon, and dinner with Alex, a man I'd been seeing casually for a few weeks. As I sipped my coffee on the balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky in pinks and oranges, I felt content. Not happy exactly, there was still a sadness in me for what I'd lost, or rather for what I'd never really had. A family that would choose me, parents who would protect me, a sister who would believe me. But I had built a good life for myself. I had friends who supported me, a career I enjoyed, a home that felt safe. I had freed myself from the obligation to constantly rescue people who wouldn't do the same for me. Will I ever call the number my mother left in that letter? I don't know. Not today, probably not tomorrow, maybe not for months or even years. I'm no longer angry, not white-hot angry anyway. That's progress, I suppose. But I'm not ready to let them back into my life. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, isn't easily repaired. And I'm not sure I want to put in the effort to repair it. For now, I'm focusing on myself, on healing, on building relationships with people who value me, who believe me, who respect my boundaries. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have a conversation with my mother, to hear Lily's apology, to look my father in the eye again. But it will be on my terms, when I'm ready, and with the clear understanding that I'm no longer the family fixer, no longer the bank, no longer the one who sacrifices her own well-being to make everyone else comfortable.